Are you an adult autistic individual who thought you would never identify as autistic or be diagnosed formally because you didn't take things literally? Hi, I'm Jen. I'm the kind of old autistic lady, and we're going to address just that scenario today. The ability to understand if something's literal, if it's not literal, if it's sarcastic, or any number of things like this. I think there's a fair number of autistic people, myself included, who can tell the difference if we devote the brain power to doing so. What happened to me today was very much kind of unfortunate, but it was eye-opening for me. So I was asked by two different people in a work scenario, think corporate, if I had the bandwidth to do certain things, projects. I'm going to call it projects. And I really hadn't stopped to think about it until today. And in other jobs I've had in corporate prior to the one I'm in now, they were almost always jobs where I didn't have any kind of choice or say in what I was being given to do. And if I did, I might have a choice in terms of when to do the work and how to do the work, but it was never a matter of I wasn't going to be given the work. So, for example, when I was a teacher, I had certain curriculum I was going to teach, and I didn't have a say one way or the other. It didn't matter if I had bandwidth. I had to teach what the curriculum was. When when I worked in a contact center, again, you're just given calls. You're told when to take your break. You're told when to take your lunch. You're told when to listen to your calls for quality. There is no, hey, do you have bandwidth to do this? Even when I took on different roles in corporate, within contact centers, I still didn't have a choice. Someone was providing to me a list of things I had to do or a project or whatever, and I just did them. And if I couldn't get them done in my normal workday, I was salaried and had to stay extra and do those tasks. But the team I'm on now, which is a fantastic team, I'm not throwing any kind of shade at them at all, but I'm given tasks to do, but very seldom is it, hey, I want you to do XYZ. It's almost always, do you have bandwidth to do XYZ? And I had always interpreted up until today that the bandwidth question probably was a no, you're being told to do this. We're just being polite. So the correct answer is always yes. And today I was in the middle of doing something else when, for the second time today, someone asked me if I had bandwidth to do something. And I went into immediate literal mode because I didn't have brain power at that exact moment to put any kind of processing behind why I was being asked the question. I just immediately said, well, I don't know. I was just given this other thing to do. I need to find out more about it. So I'm not sure. And the person took that as a fine answer. There was no blowback from it at all. And after I learned a little bit more about what that second request was, I said, oh yeah, I should have time to do this. It really doesn't matter what the first thing was and how long that's going to take. What you're asking me to do isn't really a big time drain. That's not a problem. But after I had that conversation, I had this slight moment of panic because that little flip of a moment of, I'm going to take this question literally, regardless of, was it intended literally? What's my relationship with this person like? What is the hierarchy in terms of, because I'm pretty much at the bottom of the totem pole on this team. I changed careers a little over a year ago. And so I was hired into a junior role. And there are senior roles and lead roles and managers and senior managers. And, there's a hierarchy. I'm at the bottom of it. But at the same time, the people that asked me to do these two tasks, we're all on the same team, but they're not at the same level in the hierarchy. And different types of tasks may take priority over other types of tasks, regardless of who's asking because of the hierarchy. And in my raw autistic state of I'm just going to not have to analyze why the person asked me the question, what was expected of me to say versus not expected of me to say, I just answered it. And I think this could be dangerous to a lot of people in a work environment in particular, but also in personal life for similar questions. So I intend to do a whole series about questions like this. Some of them may be shorts, some of them may be long form content like this. I'm just going to throw in there's not enough to make a video of it, but I have a running joke with my spouse that if the question is, hey, do you want to help me do XYZ? The answer is probably going to be no, because the question isn't, will you help me? It's, do you want to help me? And wanting is a very subjective thing. And almost always, if I'm in the middle of something else, my knee-jerk reaction is going to be no, because not because I don't want to help, but because I'm in the middle of something else and my brain wants to have closure on the thing I'm doing right at that moment. So almost always there's a look that passes and it's like, will you help me? And of course I'm like, yeah, let's do the thing. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up in this longer form video, going back to the question of, do you have bandwidth to do XYZ, is the idea of autonomy in a job and just how much leeway as an autistic person we have to say yes, no, or maybe. And all of the brain power that I didn't realize until I really sat and thought about it today was going into every time I would just answer yes. The answer was always yes for me. And this became problematic a little bit, not in this job, but in the job I had for a really long time, because there was an unwritten expectation that if I had too much work to do, it didn't really matter. I was expected to do it all. And so the answer had to be yes. And the team I'm on now, very much, we are reminded by people higher up in the hierarchy repeatedly that if we don't have bandwidth, we're supposed to talk to somebody about it. Or if we take stuff on and then we realize that we're really stressed out because we have too much work to do, that we're supposed to actually go to management and tell management this, and they can reallocate some of the work or maybe strip out some of the less cumbersome parts or less important parts of a task, any number of ways that they're going to manage that. And they say it so often that I believe it. I also have been on the team for a while, and I know that the people I'm working with are of high integrity and that they really do truly mean it. It wasn't as if when I said, no, let me find out, I was just given this other thing. It wasn't like I immediately got a ping from a manager saying, well, you weren't allowed to turn this down. Because I do believe in some of my other roles that would have been the case in the past. If you're a teacher, you can't just say, no, I'm not going to teach this, or well, I might teach it, but I'm not really sure. Let me just check. It's not an option. So if you say no, it's like insubordination. And the task that I think is hard, as I sat back and I thought about making content for this video today, is because employment can be a really difficult thing for anybody to get right now. The economy and the job market are really bad, but statistically, for people that are autistic, it's a much harder playing field to just get past the interview stage, let alone be actually hired, and then the whole culture fit and staying with a job for a long period of time. I think it's a pretty well-known thing that within the autistic adult community, that the unemployment rates or the underemployment rates are statistically much higher than the allistic population. And there's a lot of reasons for this. And this video isn't necessarily a commentary on that, because I think there's a lot of things that could be made better about work that would help neurodiverse people. And, figuring that all out is its own landscape. And, I occasionally make videos about stuff like that too. But in this case, what do you do? And this is an open question, but what do you do if you're new on a team and you're asked that question? Do you have bandwidth to do X? Or maybe you're not new to a team, but you've gotten a new manager or a new lead, or, maybe none of that has changed, but maybe the company got bought out by another company and, leadership might not have been shaken up quite yet, but you don't know what the new landscape is. What's the safest play here? And it's a complicated thing because on one hand, to stay employed, I think the knee-jerk reaction of a lot of us is, yes, I have the bandwidth. I'll take it on. I don't care what it takes. I have to feed myself and put a roof over my head. I can't afford to say no. Unfortunately, in our community, what that leads to a lot of the time, though, is we get burned out to the point that we end up not being able to hold on to a job. Either voluntarily we leave, or we're involuntarily separated because a person can only do so much. And our capacity during certain stages and chapters in life may be more or less, having a baby or something like that, a really big life change. We only have so much bandwidth. And so what I really have as my intention with this video is going through some of those questions and saying, well, how much of no, I can't do this am I allowed to say? Or maybe not how often, but to what types of things am I allowed to say no? And can I work that into an accommodation? For example, having clearer language. In other words, when something is truly not optional, don't present it like it's an option. Just say, hey, will you do this? That at least lightens the mental load in a team environment, in a work environment, to go, okay, this isn't optional, so don't put brain power behind trying to figure out if it's optional. And that may seem like a small thing, but it's really not, because the amount of brain power that any one individual gives to things that happen that are vital to paying bills and making a living and keeping a roof over one's head, by we, I say I, but I anticipate there's at least one other person that I can say this as a we. I don't mean it as a universal we. We sometimes tend to spend an inordinate amount of time either scripting in advance or running prior conversations through our heads to analyze them to say, did I say anything wrong? Did I say anything that could be interpreted in a way that I didn't intend? Did I do anything that I intended a certain way and I know for sure was taken incorrectly, that I have to sort of like do a relationship repair the next time I see a particular person, versus just, hey, here's the work, I'm asking you to do it. You don't have to at least spend time on that. So that can be a conversation, whether it's a formal accommodation, because the whole let's be direct, a lot of people don't know how to be direct, especially if they've never been coached on it, if they've never known somebody who is neurodivergent in their life, or if they just happen to come from a family or a culture that is specifically direct. So that's kind of the first section of what I want to discuss. The second section is for work environments that involve more than one culture. Something that I haven't talked about a whole lot on this video, but that I think is relevant to what I'm talking about, is that one of the reasons that I'm pretty confident as a career coach, as a quality coach, as a performance coach, is I have a really deep background in dealing with people from different cultures and different countries and different language branches. Besides being a Spanish teacher for a number of years at the early part of my career and having studied foreign language, in the corporate world, I have an extensive background in dealing with people and working with people who have a completely different way of communicating. And sometimes, depending on what the scenario was, like for a long time, I worked for a US arm of an organization, but that had a very large arm in a particular Asian country that basically everyone in every department I knew had counterparts in that country. And in order to have like 24/7 customer support, that's why there was more than one country involved, so that people had a chance to sleep and wouldn't necessarily have to be on, 3 sets of 8-hour shifts. But then I ended up working for the global branch of that same organization and ended up working with people from all over the world. I mean, China, India, the UK, Morocco, Costa Rica, Puerto Rico, Germany, Poland, Australia, Japan. I think I said China already, but if I didn't, China, Malaysia, Canada, Mexico. I have an extensive background in this. And so everything I just said about, well, this question of what do you have bandwidth to do gets even more complicated if the conversation is happening between people from two completely different parts of the world and for whom English may or may not be their first language, or whatever language they were working with, because I definitely had coworkers who did customer support in languages other than English, but then also had another non-English language as the language that they spoke in the office, because again, I was in a very global organization at that point in my career. And so questions that also can be good for accommodations are, if you're working heavily with people in other parts of the world. I'll just give an example. Okay, so in the United States, overall, generally speaking, forget about neurotypical versus autistic for just a moment. In the United States, we tend to communicate a little bit more directly than in some other countries. And I'm gonna say Asian countries, like for example, India. I have a lot of coworkers from India, and we've had a lot of training internal to the organization. And so we know how each other works as an overarching cultural concept. But then of course there's a company culture as well. And so I would say that probably by and large, the way as a larger team that I communicate with people in India is very similar to how I would communicate with people in the US in my current role, because there's a large amount of cultural awareness on both sides. But it's not uncommon in different cultures, and I'll take the US and India as an example, with different expectations and different ways of wording. Yes, I can take something on, or no, I can't, or yes, I can meet a deadline, or no, I can't, or maybe I can, or I don't know if I can. In the US, in American culture, we tend to be a little bit more precise about that language at a literal level. But in India, depending on the situation, depending on the part of the country, it's a huge country. There's a lot of different cultures there. Depending on what is this got a global flair to it or not, it's not uncommon in certain parts of India that if you don't know if you can meet an expectation, that the answer is going to be yes, but that yes doesn't necessarily always mean yes in the same way it would mean a yes in US culture. And you can take whole courses on this kind of thing. I mean, it's not a judgment call that I'm making as I describe this. I've taken courses on it, and this is like, I've had a whole course on just this one topic. And it really helped me to know that people I was working with, if they said yes, still might not feel like they could deliver on it. And that as a cultural concept, that maybe more frequent checkpoints would be needed to say, okay, we thought a deliverable would happen on a particular date, and we're checking in. Let's say we're 10%, we should be about 10% of the way through. Is it still foreseeable that this particular deadline could be met? And if we got closer to that deadline, if the answer became no, and we had that relationship of checking in on a regular basis, then a more direct conversation could be had to say, you know what, I don't think I'm going to meet this. Or I thought I could meet it, and then some other project went kind of haywire. But in some cultures, the person really has to be asked, do you still think you can meet this? Whereas in American culture, it's a little bit more common that if a person has said, hey, I can meet this deadline, that if something comes up, the person who previously said they could meet the deadline is expected to speak up and say something. There's just a difference in who speaks first, or whose responsibility it is to flag, hey, things might have changed. It's just a little bit different. Not better, not worse, just different. And so everything that I've been talking about so far about literal communication, I've been talking about from a little bit of a US bent. But know that if you're asking for accommodations and you have team members that are global, or maybe are even still in the same country, but maybe have a more global background and have been used to working with people in a particular part of the world, the direct communication that needs to happen sometimes is not only an accommodation, but just by and large, like I have not disclosed, for example, to everybody on my team that I'm autistic, but I have enough background in knowing myself, knowing corporate culture, knowing the culture at the place I'm working now, as well as having been a teacher and a coach for many years, to know that, you know, the check-in has to happen, or I have to be proactive in saying, you know, hey, I can't meet this or whatever. And maybe then dealing with somebody that didn't know me as well. And so if you've never coached someone, or you've never had someone reporting to you who's from another culture and could also be autistic, to where we've got two variables, there really needs to be a frank conversation, especially if that individual has disclosed that they just really need direct conversation, or they're not sure how literally to take you. Not everybody feels comfortable saying that, but if you're unclear, asking is always going to be the best thing. So circling back to this whole notion of, well, do you have bandwidth to do X? Okay. In a situation like that, there's all these variables that I think as an autistic person, I tend, and some other autistic people as well, tend to either knee-jerk and answer literally when we're overwhelmed, when we're at our capacity, when we've been having a bad day, when we're not feeling well. And there may or may not be ramifications to that, depending on, again, the relationships, the context, the culture, all these other things. But to at least be aware that this could be a dangerous question, and to have it in the back pocket of, okay, if I've overcommitted, I need to second guess this and really do some evaluation and analysis after the fact to say, do I need to backtrack and say, hey, I said yes. I've since looked at some other things for my, workload, and things have changed. But it also is one of these things that up until today, I hadn't thought about it in quite the same way as I had after knee-jerking it and wondering, oh my gosh, am I supposed to answer this literally? Am I not supposed to answer this literally? And then finding out what both tasks are, and basically be able to say, okay, I can handle both of these. And genuinely, both tasks I was asked about are things that are in my wheelhouse to do. I'm comfortable doing. I might not have done this exact task in the past, but it is the type of a task that I would excel at. I think if I was giving something that I was iffy about that I could do well, then more communication would have to happen. But that's on me, right? Not every team would have that as an expectation, depending on how open management is to having that kind of a conversation. There's just so many variables. So the thing I want to leave with as kind of a call to action at the end of this video is number one, if you always answer yes to that question, is it okay, have a conversation with yourself internally, talk it through with maybe another coworker or another uninterested party who's maybe also autistic and would bring a different lens to the conversation, to talk it out, to say, am I allowed to say no? Am I allowed to say maybe? Am I allowed to say, can I get back with you? Have I known other people on the team who have said no and there were horrible consequences? Or is it suspected that that happened, but, it was kind of taboo to go around asking people why they had negative consequences happen? Not to go off rumors, but do I suspect that maybe in dealing with a certain person, saying no, maybe, I don't know, can I get back with you, is more or less acceptable than another person? And how hierarchical is your team, is your organization? All of those things that can be helpful to just bounce ideas off the wall with someone who's not on the team. Of course, not saying anything that's confidential that, could lead to other issues. But my call to action here is, I think one of the reasons we get ourselves into trouble is that we're afraid of saying no, or we're afraid that essentially, if I turn down work or I take something too literally, whatever it is, there's just so many fears that can be wrapped up in answering a question like this, ways it could be dangerous. And so if you have a trusted person who you've made a connection with in the autistic community, I think it would be a really good thing to spend time talking about it. And I know I myself am going to do the same thing. I have a handful of people in the autistic community that I bounce ideas off of. And even though I've made a video about it, I absolutely intend, once I have a chance to meet with those trusted people, to go through this exact scenario and say, is there anything that you think I could be missing here that could bite me in the you-know-what later on? Because I have a blind spot, because it's my own career. It's my own set of consequences. It's my own set of fears that someone who's not in the situation can help with. And one thing that I think our community is great with is just dishing it out straight. If I think that somebody did something that's going to potentially lead to negative consequences, and I know that that person trusts me to give them, the 100% truth, because they're also autistic and they're genuinely asking me because they want help with it, which I think personally happens a lot more in the neurodivergent community than maybe in a mixed group of people. Sometimes people ask for advice and they don't want to be given advice. Sometimes they ask for advice and they just want to be validated, right? So I think in the autistic community, we do a good job of saying, hey, this is the type of feedback I want when we're talking to each other, when we're in a safe space, that we might not do in a different situation. So with all that said, if you found the video helpful, please like and subscribe, share, leave me a comment. Is there any other loaded question that is either similar or dissimilar to this one that you think would be either good for another video, or you just want to say, hey, I hear you on this, I feel seen or heard, or you want to contradict something I've said? All the comments are welcome. The only comments that I take issue with is if they're not respectful toward other people making comments, because, it's not a community at that point. But if everything is being said in good faith and is just an agreement, disagreement, different take on things, different lens, all of it, leave me comments. I read them all. Thanks for watching. Take care.